My name is Nicholas. Now today I'm going to tell you a story of what may have seemed a typical day to any normal intern. But there was nothing normal about today. Now to understand my horror, I want you to do a few things before you continue reading. Firstly, turn out all the lights. Utter darkness. The only light radiating from your computer screen. Secondly, make sure there is utter silence. Not a sound. No television, no music, no talking. Lastly, make sure you are alone. You'll see why soon enough. Oh, how very soon you'll see. It was my first day as an intern at Nickelodeon Studios. They picked me up after receiving my associate's degree from ITT Tech. It was a stupid school, but it taught me what I needed for this chance. Running donuts and making coffee sucked, I can tell you that much, but it had its perks. Me being on the road of an editor, sometimes receiving the opportunity to see episodes before they were quote-unquote officially released. Today I was invited into the editing studio, but you see, it was odd. There was no one in there. Normally this would cost me my internship, but oh God, I couldn't resist the urge. It was overwhelming. Encompassing. Oh dear God, that feeling. As soon as I walked in, the door slammed behind me. I figured this is one of those somewhat cruel pranks that the editors sometimes pulled in the new guys. So when the door locked, I figured this was some kind of punishment, and my heart slowly sank. My internship was in huge jeopardy. Oh, they probably already found out that I was here. Panicking, I ran at the door with all my force, slamming into it with all my might. Now, not to boast, but I was not the weakest guy. I had been working out for the past 3 years. But dear God, there was something on the other side of that door, some force stranger than the strongest man, making sure that I couldn't leave until I did what I was sent to do. Now in my panic, I hadn't noticed the netbook, the chair, and the small table it was sitting on. In the disc tray, there was a blank CD. These were usually editing discs, completely cherry episodes, just barely leaving production. It didn't have any markings, or even a name, but something beckoned me. Something pushed me to that chair and forced me to sit. As I slowly pulled the chair back, my heart rate slowly increased. You could almost hear it in my chest. Thump, thump, thump. I slowly pushed the DVD tray shut without any prompt or confirmation. It just started. Something seemed odd straight away. Normally it would open in VLC or Windows Media Player. However, this was odd. It just opened, with no video player popping up. It seemed that the computer itself was just a video player. But it couldn't be. It seemed just like any normal netbook the interns or staff carried. Or was it? As the title card flashed, I could immediately see my first assumption was wrong. It wasn't a cherry or slightly edited build. They never had title cards. This was either finished or just ready to leave production. The title card seemed odd. I'd never seen anything like it. Instead of the usual fun font they used, that popped and seemed colorful, of course to appeal more to children, it seemed more gothic. Something you would see in a horror film. The words, the title card, made my heart sink further. It had to be a joke, right? Why would somebody try and scare me this terribly, though? The words read, "You nosy intern. You shouldn't have come in here." And the usual happy bubble transition that we were all used to was gone. The text just melted down the screen, almost like blood running down a wall, and it slowly faded into the show from a couple of seconds of utter silence. It transitioned into one of the familiar openings, with SpongeBob slowly snoring in bed and Gary sleeping beside him on his newspaper. The blowhole of the alarm clock was there, even the bed was. I began to feel relieved. I remembered all of this from when I was a kid. It seemed normal, but was it? Oh dear God, I was wrong. Forgive me. You must forgive me. I'm choked up just writing this. I wanted to forget this, but something compels me to share my story. I was expecting the blowhole to go off and SpongeBob to start his typical routine. Oh, how bad that thing annoyed me as a kid. But it never came. There must have been at least just 3+ minutes of SpongeBob snoring. Then, something finally happened. It started to slowly pan into his face. Oh, so slowly, waiting in anticipation, just dying for something to happen. I would later greatly regret this decision. Oh, what I would have given if this just ended right then and there. As it finally reached deep into his face, you could clearly see his expression. It was one of horror, malice, one someone in a terrible nightmare would have. His eyes almost seemed as if they had been stitched shut. And then it had a transition. And not the usual fade to black or the joyful bubbles, but something altogether much more sinister. It was a fiery transition, almost like the previous screen had burned up. By all appearances, we were now in SpongeBob's mind. In his dream, his nightmare. It appeared to be Bikini Bottom. Oh, but there was something very, very wrong. The whole city seemed in shambles. Their horizon blood red, the buildings burning. SpongeBob was just walking down the road. It seemed to be the typical path they would normally take to the Krusty Krab. The people around him. Oh dear God, I still remember it. The blood-curdling screams. At this moment I realized that there was something very wrong. This had no appeal to children. Hell, most adults would find this a bit morbid at this point. The screams. Oh, the screams. It was one of somebody in great agony and pain being tortured or slowly dying. A blood-curdling. At this point, I couldn't even see who it was coming from. It was just SpongeBob walking. Slowly, silently, as the screaming slowly continued, getting louder and louder. Oh God, I almost wanted to claw my eyes out when he turned the corner. I saw the source of the screams. It was terrifying, horrible, inhumane. It was Patrick, hammered into a stake almost like the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But also his stomach. Oh God, it had been torn open, his entrails slowly leaking out. The look on his face seeing SpongeBob. He seemed relieved for a moment, almost as if his salvation had come. His eyes began to water, just staring at SpongeBob, almost beckoningly. His eyes spoke for him. They screamed, "Please, oh God, please help me." We then transitioned over to SpongeBob. He just stood there, staring back at Patrick, watching his friends slowly suffer and die. Patrick then began to weep loudly, almost as if he understood something that I, the viewer, did not. SpongeBob began to open his mouth, slowly, in a low, almost satanic, demonic voice. He whispered, and then he turned and walked away. At this moment I screamed out in horror, almost praying that somebody would hear me, somebody would walk in. It would cost me my internship, but anything to end this. Now you may be finding yourself asking, why don't you just stand up and attempt once more to escape? I couldn't. Something deep down inside me told me that if I moved, I would regret it. I had to finish watching. I just had to. SpongeBob then continued down the road, slowly approaching the Krusty Krab. In the background, you could hear more screams. Some were horrible, blood-curdling ones. You could tell that they came from one in great agony. But there had been a new sound thrown in. A horrible, twisted laugh. One of great malice. Almost as if somebody had been hunting a wild animal and thoroughly enjoying himself all too much. You could hear it very distinctly, fading away in the background, as if they were chasing someone. Something in the other direction. You could hear them. Oh, even faded, it was still heart-stopping. Blood-curdling. Spongebob seemed unfazed, almost as if he was used to it. You could now slowly hear clattering behind him, slowly breaking the mind-numbing silence. It sounded almost as if something was crawling slowly towards him. SpongeBob then slowly turned, as if he expected this, and he made his face slowly come into view. His eyes, they had changed. They no longer seemed to be his happy, normal, joyful-looking eyes. They were blood red, full of malice, hate, and anger. One would expect this from a face of a demon. Hell, even the devil himself would find this look fitting. I myself now slowly began to weep, with no end to this horror. His eyes now fixed into something. It slowly transitioned over. It was Patrick. Dear God. Oh my God. Forgive me. No human should be forced to see that. His entire lower body was now missing, with his intestines slowly trailing behind him. A trail of blood left. What was left of his arms had huge holes in them, almost as if something had been torn out from them. The nails. Had he ripped them off of the stake? His face slowly came up, and his eyes beckoned once more to SpongeBob. But this time they said something different. He slowly began to speak. I'll never forget those words. Kill me. Please. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. Just end it, please. I can't take the pain. SpongeBob responded, with the hellish tone even worse than before. You ask for forgiveness from me. Do you take me as your God? You will receive no divine forgiveness from me. You see, it's my job to make you suffer. Burn that one! And with a flick of his wrist, arms, hellish arms, seemed to just sprout from the ground, grabbed a hold of him and tore him down into what seemed like an endless hellish abyss. All the way down, you could hear that blood-curdling scream from before. No! No! No, please! No! No! Then SpongeBob slowly turned around, as if nothing had happened. He even let out a small little giggle. By this point, I had already been wishing for the same to happen to me, just so that I wouldn't have to see this anymore. At this point, I was crying so hard, I almost felt like a little girl. I felt weak, empty, as if I was about to throw up. As much as I wanted to, I just couldn't choke anything out. SpongeBob then slowly approached, finally to the doors of the Krusty Krab. The path beneath him, oh God, the usual cheery path to the entrance, had stakes all along it. Into them were hammered in the corpses of our favorite characters. Sandy, Mr. Krabs, Larry the Lobster, Pearl, Squidward, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, Mrs. Puff, and so on. And their faces, They all too wore that expression of utter sorrow and horror, as if they had died, crying in fear of what stood before them. We then transitioned back to Spongebob, who now reached for the door. Then something happened. Out of this terrible, nightmarish thing I was witnessing, the whole building began to shake, almost as if it was during an earthquake. And the only light in the room blew out and the power went out. I was now in the dark, alone, in this shaking building. I could hear my fellow interns flee and the developers run out, without even a second thought of where I was. I could hear the car tires squeal as they raced away. Why had they been such a hurry to escape? I then turned back to the show, almost as if I was forced to watch. He now stood alone, in the Krusty Krab. All the lights were out, and there was utter silence except for a small, faint red glow coming from the door that usually led into the kitchen. Oh, that so familiar kitchen where SpongeBob usually stood making his delicacies. He slowly approached it. Slowly. Silently. As he reached it, he stood in front of the door, almost as if he himself didn't want to go in. Reproachfully, he slowly turned the knob, and the door swung open. Oh God, I wish I could unsee what I saw and heard. SpongeBob faced a hellish demon of indescribable horror, burning in a portal of what seemed to be like hell itself. Was this the devil? Oh God, that fear came over me in that moment, as its mouth slowly opened.
Did you make them suffer, son?
In the most hellish tone imaginable, one of extreme rage, anger, malice, hatred, SpongeBob replied, slowly saying, almost afraid to reply,
Yes, Father. They cried, suffered, and burned. A feast of souls waits for you below. Good son. Now go back to your cage and be gone with you.
And at that moment, I finally threw up, all over my lap. Something began to emerge from SpongeBob, and his body almost slowly deflated. It almost seemed to be a human, a dog, something. Oh God, I can't even find the words. It crawled into the portal, and with a swift kick, its father kicked it into what appeared to be hell itself. Then it slowly turned and looked at me, the viewer, and slowly it mouthed something. So subtle, so quiet, but chilling to the very core. It seemed as though he was speaking directly to me. It said,
Oh, don't worry. Your world is next. It'll suffer at your hands just as much as it did at his.
and with that, the computer itself slammed shut and burst into flames. As it slowly burned, I could only weep at this horror. This couldn't be real. Nick? Nick, wake up! My eyes slowly flashed open. I was in the break room on the floor. Above me stood my friend Tina, who said, "Oh, thank God you're okay. You just collapsed. You've been out for about 5 minutes." My whole body was rattled, broken almost. Turning to her, I had this uncontrollable urge. I said, "Don't thank God on this day. He won't save us. He's abandoned us, his abominations, his failed creations." Tina looked aghast, horrified, and she ran out, screaming. I got up and quickly left. And here I sit, writing my story of the day, calmly. Maybe now I can accept my place, and oh, I have work to do. Isn't that right, Tina? You're next. I end with this. I'm coming. I am his chosen slayer for this world, a messenger of hell itself. Oh, and I'm coming for you too. Each and every one of you. And you'll never stop me. Don't try to run or hide. I will find you.
I'll send you to hell myself.
And that, my little shadows, was SpongeBob Hope is Lost. A SpongeBob Lost episode creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story? Oh my gosh, you guys, I spent literally 4 hours editing, compiling, and making this entire video. But I do this for all of you because this is exactly what you all enjoy. And honestly, I've been due to sit there and give my own thoughts about the story for a very long time. And what better way of doing it than to sit there and spend a long time sitting there and compiling a very long story? With audio effects and everything, of course. But still, my final thoughts on this creepypasta was that it was, it's a relatively okay creepypasta for the most part. If you actually look into the story itself, the author actually says that this was inspired by Squidward's Milkicide, that very famous creepypasta that a lot of people really know, that I can't exactly say the second part of it, otherwise I think you all should know. But it's actually kind of interesting how this was actually a direct inspiration from that other story. And it definitely does show. I mean, granted, it's extremely cliched and a little bit boring at times. Well, not even really boring, it's just very, very, very cliche. But at the same time, though, it's actually pretty crazy when you think about it. And at the time when I had first read this creepypasta, I have to be honest, I mean, this story more or less actually had a lot more going for it. This was actually, at least way back then, considered to be something extremely new, something, crazily interesting. And I'm not denying the fact that it isn't. It is a very interesting creepypasta. But obviously the mentioning of the blood, the gore, the deaths, the demons, all those things, I mean, I guess, I really shouldn't be hard on the story because this is probably the first story that I know of that's incorporated demons and devils and things like that in a good way. Well, in a way that works, somewhat. I mean, especially with how the episode and everything went out. Of course, I know that a lot of people will disagree with what I have to say, and and I'm going to keep this review short because my body is literally hurting like crazy right now. I'm still suffering from that whiplash. But still, I mean, this pasta more or less was pretty enjoyable. I mean, even for it being a cliche mess, and the protagonist being a complete and utter idiot at the most part, and extremely spooked at literally everything, it was still a very enjoyable pasta, and I could definitely tell that there was a lot of effort put into the story. But even then, though, with that said, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you disagree with it, that's perfectly fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of the story? I give this story a 6 out of 10. An enjoyable pasta and definitely a nice little, blast from the past on my channel. And of course all the everything else that was incorporated, but still cliche, still a little bit but definitely is still a relatively enjoyable pasta. Even if it is out of date, it's still relatively enjoyable. But what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you guys enjoy it? Did you guys not? And also, what would you have personally done to help make this story a lot better? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'm the Shadow Reader. Thanks again for watching today's episode, and if you're brand new here to this channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. And of course, like always, roll the outro because I'm out. In fear and surprise as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed drift, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.